not everybody did make it. Some people had problems getting out of Boston and Atlanta and the like, so there may be some changes in the program to accommodate that. But welcome, everybody, to Icicle 2024 here in Tempe, Arizona. Yay! I'm Michael Jay of Matchmaker Education Labs, and I'm also the chair of IEEE Icicle. And hopefully I saw there were a lot of you that were in Jim Goodell's Introduction to Learning Engineering session. It was packed. If you didn't make it to that, it's happening again tomorrow morning, and tickets are selling out fast. So make sure that you are there. Let me welcome our two conference co-chairs, and those are Danielle McNamara, who is the Executive Director of the Learning Engineering Institute here at ASU. Go ahead. We're going to go ahead.
We were starting off with something that should be starting.
Arizona State University is located in Indian Country. There are 22 tribal nations in Arizona. ASU's campuses are situated on the homelands of many indigenous peoples, including the Akimel O'odham and Peepash.
Arizona State University recognizes the original inhabitants of these lands
and recognizes that they still reside throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area.
And we recognize the impact of their wisdom and generosity towards us.
If you've flown into the valley, you have undoubtedly seen the Salt River Project canals that surround the area.
Those modern-day canals follow the framework of the canals originally constructed by ancestral Sonoran Desert people, Huhulcum, to make this area both livable and a place where peoples could thrive.
We acknowledge that the modern-day indigenous nations that descended from the ancestral peoples are the original inhabitants of this land.
Welcome to ASU. ASU is truly committed to its charter, and so we are from the Learning Engineering Institute. I had hoped to be able to show you or do tours of the Learning Engineering Institute. However, it doesn't exist yet due to asbestos and fire codes. So if we had just gathered a month from now, maybe we would be not faced with plastic hanging from the walls. But you can just imagine the team that we have, and so that's what really creates the Learning Engineering Institute, and I hope you are able to meet many of our team members here, as well as everyone from ASU that contributes to the learning engineering ethos at ASU. So I'm Danielle McNamara, and I'm the Executive Director of the Learning Engineering Institute. I'm just so happy to host our conference this week. I want to start off by thanking the many people who contributed to to organizing this conference. It was an enormous effort. I want to thank Tracy, who was a crucial component, and then Jody Liss. Where's Jody? Jody, nothing would have happened without her help. So please, big round of applause. There are so many other people who contributed, and Michael will say more about that in a minute. So the Learning Engineering Institute at ASU is dedicated to the enhancing student performance, students' learning experiences, and their well-being. And our goal is to empower researchers to advance inclusion. So we center around inclusion and equity-oriented research. And so our goal is to really understand learning and to implement and test and learning solutions. And we do that by convening and facilitating transdisciplinary teams, so with multidisciplinary collaborative teams at our core. So some key ingredients for our institute are centering around student success at ASU in Arizona, and taking an approach of iterative multidisciplinary research, which is the core value in learning engineering. I'm so excited that we're going to be able to see so many examples of learning engineering in process and practice at this conference. I think it's a super exciting program that we have in store, and a signature of a good program is you won't know which room to go to. So welcome to ASU. As I said, ASU is really centered around the charter. Learning Engineering Institute just wouldn't exist if we didn't have this charter that centers our focus, centers our energy, just as the land acknowledgement grounds us in our dedication to our community, our dedication to serving equity and inclusion. So we have many people from ASU here, I hope, and so welcome ASU representatives. Just like learning engineering, we have a really multidisciplinary representation, people from many different disciplines, which represents the society, and getting together and coming to solutions from many different perspectives and working through that hard problem of coming at things from different directions. I want to, one of our ASU representatives is my colleague, Punya Mishra. He is, so yay Punya, and we have our keynote tomorrow morning. And Punya is just an amazing speaker. That's impossible to really. Oh, bar low. No, there's no low bar here. I don't miss Punya's talk. That's my biggest advice for this. Make sure you are here on time at 9 a.m. for Punya's talk. You will have a great time. And then they put together many different resources for you. So I'll leave this up for a second in case you want to go to those links, or you can just go to the Icicle website and find restaurants and attractions. I think we tried to center on the attractions that don't involve walking outside. I hope that, and there's so many restaurants nearby, I think you can find a restaurant without walking too far. I do recommend things like the Heard Museum. That's a big attraction. You would love something like that, or the aquarium, all inside attractions. And I do want to remind you that I did only, for those who were there, were in Pittsburgh last year in the humidity, I only promised one thing. Does anybody remember what I promised? good hair. Everyone with long hair, curly hair, will have better hair than last year. So here is to good hair. Oh, sorry. I left out one thing. Do not underestimate the need for water. H2O. That's also critical for your hair. So, water, drink a lot of it. And now I will pass it over to Megan, our co-chair. Megan, do you want to take it away?
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, ASU, for hosting us. This is really, really fantastic. The thought of putting on a conference called Icicle in Phoenix in July is not lost on anybody. We get it. But I just want you to think about what it takes to pull off a conference like this. So if you are one of the conference committee, do me a favor, quick stand up. Conference committee folks. Awesome. There's lots of them, and there's more of them not here, but thank you. Sponsors, right? As we look at what it takes to pull off a conference, it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of collaboration, a lot of creativity. You may also say, wow, this is what it takes to pull off learning engineering. Yes, did that intentionally, right? But one of the things it also takes to do this is some support, some money. So I want to do a very quick shout out and thank you to our supporters for helping make this conference happen and helping keeping your registration fees low and reasonable. So thank you, sponsors. As you take a look at sponsors and you think about kind of what this pulls together, right? So Danielle was talking about student success and thinking about how do we make students successful and connect in and build that learning. And my job and the job of a few of the others of you here is to pick them up from when they become workers, right? When they start becoming professionals in the workplace, and how do we apply learning engineering in that perspective as well? So be on the lookout for sessions that have to do with that, and many of our sponsors come from that corporate space, so you may want to go out and talk to them about what it is they're doing and how they see learning engineering engaging here. I also want to acknowledge one other group of folks who help make a conference happen, and that's speakers. And this conference is rich with speakers. So if you are on the program somewhere speaking, do me a favor, stand up for a second. Thank you. Thank you. You have put your neck out, you have put together your thoughts, you have offered to share what it is that you're doing and you're learning with your community, and that is so appreciated. And in addition to attending their sessions and applauding them, the other thing they need is data. Please fill out your session evaluations. That's how this thing works, right? And your evaluations actually were very, very carefully poured over after last year's conference to make this year's conference. So it's really, really important. There is a single, let me tell you some logistics here, a single form that you will use to fill out your session evaluations for every single session. This makes it super easy for you. Take a picture of this, load it up in your phone, keep coming back after every single session. Session presenters, if you want data, ask for it. Remind people, right? Spaced repetition. At the end of your session, right? Remind them that you'd like them to fill that out. If you lose this, you'll also see printouts around the place, right? You might get the suggestion that we would like you to fill out your session evaluations. It provides such amazing feedback and insight and is such a gift to your speakers. And now, back to Michael J.
Great. Thanks, Danielle and Megan. Really appreciate that. For those who think because I am the chair of Icicle, I control anything, obviously I don't, since I'm supposed to be done at 9:15, which is what it is right now. I will take a few more minutes of your time to go through what I wanted to say. Last year, I introduced the conference through a metaphor that we are like an orchestra, which is we're not all trying to become the same instrument. We're all our own instrument in the process and bring something to the table in our conversations about learning engineering. This year, partially because of an interaction between Janet Kolodner and Steve last year, we determined that we are a family, albeit a dysfunctional family. And if you've been to the SIG and MIG meetings, you'll understand that because we have wonderful conversations. And it's not about coming to consensus, it's about coming to understand what each of us knows. So do find your long-lost cousins, the people who you can share information with here. Find your common ground and collaborate. Megan already made reference to this, as did Danielle. This is our conference committee. You'll see them with their conference committee tags on, and do, if you see these people, thank them. And remember that you'll have a chance to volunteer for next year, and it's very rewarding. Icicle began in 2017, an idea through a number of people, some of whom are here. And recently, in the last year, the name of the organization has shifted. We're no longer part of the Industry Connections group within IEEE, but now we're the International Consortium for Innovation and Collaboration in Learning Engineering. So we have over 1,000 people on our mailing list and over 100 active members, and we hope that that will grow and you will all be excited to get more involved. How Icicle is structured, if you just want to have some visual for that, it's kind of a matrixed organization around both the special interest groups and the market interest groups. And they do overlap and in fact discuss some of the same kinds of things but from different perspectives. And so you should look for, what did somebody call it, your home in Icicle. This is where the real work of Icicle gets done. And look for, the SIG and MIGs, or SIGs and MIGs that makes the best sense for you. And that's, again, where the real work of the organization happens. These are the list of SIGs and MIGs. Is it readable? Maybe a little bit, but you all should have received a little key that says, here is the SIGs and MIGs, and here's the one that I'm involved with. I only put one on mine originally, and then one of the SIG and MIG leaders said, well, how come I'm not on there? So I found I had to put them all on. But do affiliate yourself and look for people who have similar interests. Also, we have here the Localization and Globalization Committee. There's a set of talks on Wednesday, and we want to make sure that we're not just a US-centric implementation, but that this is being done, as we all know, it's all about context, and context shifts depending on where you are, and we want to make sure that learning engineering really is being practiced in places other than those where most of our membership lives right now. We also have the Publishing Committee, the Steering Committee, and the Executive Committee here, so look for those individuals also. And now, something from an engineering perspective. Is it going to play, guys? Here we go.
Well, you'd think the invention of tape adhesive was a triumph of chemistry, of science. It was instead developed by the engineering method. Make no mistake, chemistry was necessary to synthesize these adhesives, these tackifiers mixed with viscoelastic substances. But, well, we can explain adhesion at a molecular level, van der Waals forces and the like. There's no detailed scientific theory that designs an adhesive. In fact, pressure-sensitive tape predates much of the most elementary molecular understanding of adhesion. Tape has been mass-produced since the early 20th century. That engineers developed and refined tape without this knowledge is no surprise. Recall that the purpose of the engineering method is to solve problems before we have full scientific knowledge. Engineers work their way around this lack of knowledge about what happens at the molecular level by developing precise ways to quantify the unknowable molecular forces that lead to adhesion. This is my favorite, a ramp used to quantify the tackiness of an adhesive. Place a ball at the top of the ramp, let go, and the tape's tackiness abruptly stops the ball. Engineers worked out a standard-sized ramp, carefully spelling out its specifications and dimensions. Here's 4 types of tape in order of decreasing tackiness: duct tape, masking tape, Scotch tape, removable Scotch tape. So using a mix of chemistry as a tool empiricism, and a lot of intuition, engineers developed the adhesives for tape that can be used to do just about anything. Although there is one thing you should not do with duct tape, as noted inside this roll. Do not use it in flues, chimneys, mufflers, or tailpipes. So don't use it on a duct or anything like it. I'm Bill Hammack, the engineer guy.
So improving learning is an even stickier situation, as we all know. I share that only because, number one, you now know what I do late at night, which is look for obscure engineering-related videos. But I also found that really breaking outside of our usual way about thinking about just cognition and thinking about the engineering process, and that use of empirical data, but also intuition to help drive us as we move ahead, is absolutely essential as part of the engineering effort that is part of learning engineering. Of course, we use a lot of other pieces, including new data that comes up all the time. So hopefully that video will give you a way to think out of the box about what we're doing here. And of course, you have to bring in all the other parts of the flower. And if you don't know this diagram, you will by the end of this conference. I do want to just state a few things that are called to action for the coming year. One is to identify and highlight exemplary examples of how and where learning engineering is being done. That is an incredibly important thing at the point where we are as an organization. The second is to make learning engineering a household concept associated with quality learning, training, and teaching. It doesn't mean that everybody has to understand what learning engineering is, but they need to know that learning engineering is an essential part to seeing good quality processes around learning, teaching, and training. We need to stimulate research in how and why learning engineering processes generate quality learning, training, and engineering. So we need to, as Icicle, work together with organizations like LEI and others to stimulate that research that we can say, not just intuitively, but in fact factually, what are the benefits that learning engineering brings to the process. And lastly, we need to work globally and respect local contexts and understand how learning engineering is being employed. You will see these again. They are really our charge for the next year. So quick housekeeping. You probably know your way around. There's some bathrooms out over here. I feel like a flight attendant out here and back there. Over on the side, there are some restrooms as well. In case of emergencies, get the heck out of here. There are stairs to go down. Don't try to use the elevators. It's very close. QR codes, there are, the Wi-Fi and password, I believe, are in the workbook. I didn't verify that. They are great. Thank you. There are lots of QR codes. Do use them, and they're in the book, and they'll take you to a lot more depth of information. There are food and breaks, and those will be held out over here. And while you're there, please do look at the information about those who are supporting Icicle. It's essential to our success, near term and long term. And all of our sessions are in the immediate area, in rooms that are on the other side of each of these walls. There also are a few other rooms. I think that's on my next one. Nope. Okay. There are a few other rooms for taking calls. There's a quiet room if you need to do some work. There's a room for prayer if you need that, and there's also a room for breastfeeding. And if you need access to that, please do let us know. So Brant, come on up. Thank you, you guys. Thanks a lot. Our next speaker, who is opening our day, is going to be talking about modeling complexity in order to solve it at scale. And of course, solving complexity at scale is the theme of our conference. Brant Darg is somebody who's been involved with Icicle from early on. And what I particularly enjoy about Brant is I'm a K-12 educator by background, and yet I've learned so much from Brant, as I have from others, from outside of my field, in terms of appreciating and understanding how a lot of the things that are happening in other domains really apply to what I do. So, and by the way, Brant is just a great guy. So if you get a chance, do hang out with him while you're here at the conference. So Brant, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Very well.
Thanks, Brant. And here's the clicker.
I am looking forward to having better hair here in Arizona. At the risk of losing my voice entirely, I would like to talk about the genesis of this talk. One of my responsibilities at Boeing has always been OPM, other people's money, how to get contracts and awards to work on really interesting things. One of them was a contract where the prime contractor was using automated scenario, or developing a technique for automated scenario generation. They brought me in, well, they were using genetic algorithms for novelty. But they brought me in to determine, is this scenario, the one that we mutated, came out of a mutation, is it valid for training? And if so, where and how to use it for training and education? So that's one and one of the papers that was in the original RFP, request for a proposal, was on complexity. And it was along the lines of item response theory, saying if we put a number of complexity on an item, then we can choose it. We can go harder or easier. But I looked at the problems that they were the scenarios, and I said we should not narrow it down to a single number. We need to understand the complexity in different dimensions, because what one person considers more difficult, another person finds that easier. And so to be able to select the right scenario or right adjustment of a scenario, we need to adjust the situation so it challenges that person. And then I heard an interesting podcast, Cautionary Tales, where he talked about complexity and tightly coupled things don't work together. And so they have normal accidents. Failures occur naturally if a system is both complex and tightly coupled. So this was a really interesting, and I picked up Charles Perrow's book on the normal accident theory. And then this conference said, solving complexity. So I pitched the idea of, well, to solve complexity, we have to know it, we have to understand it, we have to model it. Now, I do come from a modeling and simulation background, so modeling is important. However, now we need to understand, and you'll get practice at the end of the session if there's time still, to try this out and choose a topic. We've got some seeds for you to determine, okay, what are the dimensions? What kind of failures can occur? So that's kind of an overview of the talk, and I guess I really don't need to go into it, but we will. So we can skip this. So I will be talking about what is a model, what is complexity and such, and the tightly coupled. So I talked a lot about those things. So now let's kind of explain them. So is anybody familiar with DIF, right? It's software engineers would say, well, it's the differences. Well, training developers think of it, well, what's the difficulty? What's the importance of this task or job? And how often does it need to be done? So that determines what should be trained, what needs to be overtrained, things like that. So that's a model of that job or that task or whatever. Now, complexity and failure. So what do those mean? Well, I kind of briefed you a little bit on Charles Perrow's natural or normal accident theory. The problem is a lot of times we add fail-safe mechanisms, and they often backfire because they add complexity or they add tight coupledness. So a fail-safe mechanism can't work unless it understands what's going on. Well, how does it understand what's going on? So that adds the complexity. There's also other reasons why fail-safe mechanisms, people tend to rely on them too much and things. So I like this definition of complexity because it talks about the way I understand it and the way I think that we need to focus on what complexity is. There's many parts and they're difficult to understand or come up with an answer to, right? It's the unknown unknowns, right? But there's lots of little things. Those are complexities, the features that make it difficult to understand. Now, loose and tight coupling, what are those? Well, in software engineering, the loose coupling means there's not a lot of dependencies between the two things. Whereas tightly coupled means there's lots of different dependencies for different algorithms, different modules. You're like, well, I need this variable and I need this one and where do I get it and such. Whereas loosely coupled, they can operate on their own, or they know their inputs, they provide their outputs, whoever's listening. And then cohesion is because the graphic had cohesion in there, I wanted to kind of explain cohesion. It's not as important to the talk. But cohesion is, okay, that module that you've developed, how interrelated are its components? Does it serve its purpose, or are there extraneous things? Because a lot of times those extraneous things add the complexity and tight coupledness. Mathematics has an interesting word for it, combinatorial explosion. So we won't necessarily talk about that, but it's a mathematics term for the rapid growth of that complexity of the problem based on how the things that it needs are combined, so that combination. So let's talk about normal accidents. Got a few examples here. The coffee maker in some hotel rooms. This is one that has bit me a few times. It can make 1 cup or 2 cups. And that adds exponential number of complexities to it. Each of those 2 modes requires 4 different settings, and those 4 different settings has to be exact, or something will happen, not as expected. Some are nuisance, like, oh, I've got to do it again. I've got to remember to empty the cup now that it's just water. Some are somewhat catastrophic. You get boiling water or boiling coffee or tea all over. There's 2 correct ways, 1 for each choice, like 50 different ways you can fail. I've done at least a dozen of them. This is a popular one that was in the entertainment industry. The Oscars, the winners are kept secret, right? A consulting company is the only ones that know the answers, and the company that prints the really nice envelopes and cards doesn't know. They just print everything, every combination. So they've got like 3,000 different possibilities for the awards. These 2 accountants are the ones that stuff those envelopes. And for safety reasons, and they have to take different routes, there's 2 separate sets of cards in case something happens. Those 2 different sets of cards have to be, identical, right? Those sets of envelopes and the winner is. The actors can come that present can come from either side of the stage. So they're given the envelope. Well, now those stacks have to be kept in sync too, as the awards are given. And that's what happened. We don't know for sure if the presenter went on, you know, different entrance than they intended. But the previous award was given to the presenter for the best picture. They were given the card that said the best actress. But the award, whether it was best picture or best actress, was down in fine print at the bottom instead of being bold that this is what the award is. And then the name of the movie for which actress won or the best picture won was on both cards in quotes. It's just, was the actress first, or was the number of or was the movie first with all the actors and support staff and such below that? The first presenter saw that and was kind of puzzled, showed it to the other one, and all she did was read what was in quotes. And the wrong award, wrong picture won. And the two accountants are supposed to then preempt and realize what happened, and they didn't. So it was kind of an interesting fiasco. There's YouTube videos and such, and I tried to get rights to use some of the photos, and I asked the AI to make me some images of it, but just used a picture of the Oscars. It's an interesting one to talk about. I might also say that in the podcast of normal accidents, they talk about, and in my abstract in the booklet, talks about a Galileo. And although his point is well taken, he later kind of withdrew the example. But from his earlier writings, and there's a structural engineer who talked about it, and so I was having problems explaining why. But so anyway. So let's talk about complexity models. There's another I'm sure you're familiar with, Bloom's taxonomy. The U.S. Army's crawl, walk, run on development. That's very similar to the apprenticeship model. The Dreyfus model of clinical problem solving, which talks about skill acquisition for problem solving. And then scenario complexity, which we're going to be talking about today. So there's many in the room that can talk more and better about Bloom's taxonomy than I can. So I'm just going to show that, but it is about how you proceed and progress and become more knowledgeable and become an expert that you can actually create. The Dreyfus model of skill acquisition is interesting. This slide is even more interesting, the way it turned out. Similarly, you're gaining expertise, but you have 4 criteria that not criteria, but the characteristics of a person that goes from either following rules and wanting those rules to being able to act on their own and know what are the limitations of those rules, when do rules need to be followed and not. Looking at everything and not understanding where to look versus I know exactly where to look. So those types of characteristics change as you develop the expertise. Now, the thing I didn't talk about, the genesis of this talk, was after being notified that I would be presenting at this conference, I was looking for more resources to look at, and I found a book on the normal accident theory of education. And I tracked down the author, kind of stalked him, and such, and found that he grew up in Tempe, and He was excited. I contacted him. He was excited about coming. He could not make it. But it's an interesting book, an interesting read, and I developed a couple of these slides based on that book. But he's an educator up in Tacoma, Washington. Also an area that is very interested in supporting Native Americans. So what makes learning and education complex? Well, learning itself is complex. The subject, sometimes they're abstract. You know, why am I learning this? You know, what do I need to focus on? Because it's all over the place. The classroom can add complexity, the curriculum. You know, so these are things that a teacher would have to deal with. And then the student, you know, home environments, all these different things add complexity. Some of them are the same dimensions maybe, but they're all different ways that make learning in the educational system complex. So what are the normal failures? Well, here's a few examples of them. Of course, dropouts, right? Non-standard students can be ignored. There's inaccurate assessment of determining, you know, is the student at a standard or not. The misinterpretation of the data, if you do have data. Unfair assessments of the instructors, the teachers, the curriculum, the schools. You know, the measure of success is another failure of the complexity, because we might only focus on the wrong thing. Misaligning funding, all these. So these are some examples of the failures. So there's a couple seeds to plant. But for now, let's just kind of narrow down for this talk. And I want to talk about a couple of the complexity factors that I'm familiar with. So this is one of the three dimensions that we worked out. The Army had this complexity model, right? The next couple slides are what I worked out. Is it along the x-axis? Is it the system that you're using? Is that what makes it complex? Or is it the environmental factors, or the distractions, where I need to apply my skills? Or is it the threat along the y-axis? You know, and threats aren't necessarily, you know, adversaries or bad people. The threats to success. What are those threats to success? And they build training that way. They vary the dimensions based on progressing through the curriculum or your rank. Right? So this was done in Silvo's complexity model, where they narrowed it down to a single number. They counted up, well, the number of tasks required, because that adds complexity. The number of cues that you have to look at, the data that you have to look at. The number of subtasks makes it even more confusing, and so forth. There are dependencies between them, like the tightly coupled or not. The other dimension there is the task framework, the domain that it's being applied to, and then how many distractors are we getting? You know, how hard is it to think when you need to apply these skills? So I kind of took those along with the model that the Army had used, and came up with, well, the risk is, or the urgency. How important, you know, so this is again along the lines of that diff. How difficult is it? How frequent is, how important is this task? So the urgency, the complexity of the task itself or the systems used, and then the environmental factors. You know, the number of distractions, number of cues or data points that you need to look at. So this is what I want you to kind of do, all right? Create sort of determine what are the dimensions of a topic that you select. We've got some seeds to come up with. And then what could be the failures? What kind of failures would occur naturally because of this complexity? And in the folder of this, I've got a one-page long abstract with a lot of references. So a lot of these references should be listed there if you can't read them here. I guess I've got one more I forgot about. This is my current work that I'm doing, is for airline pilots and maintenance technicians. And the industry has come up with some interesting complexity models. One is approach types. So what makes landing more difficult or easier? What are those dimensions that make it complex or hard or difficult or more important, more critical and things? And then similarly for malfunctions, for maintenance training, but also for pilots, when things go wrong, how urgent is it to know those memory items? When you see this light, bing, bing, bing. When you know, is it something like that you need to just act? Or is it something you need to respond to? So again, and they also often call those equivalencies. So if you've mastered along one of the dimensions, it's time to change. Or you've almost mastered, it's time to change and go to a different dimension. And then come back to it, you know, for recurrent, or not recurrent, but repetition, spaced repetition. But you have to meet, you know, get mastery in all these different dimensions. And then I want to tie it to the book. So how would we apply this? And so I looked at chapter 4, which part of that talks about adapting the training. So providing the right level of training, the right dimension for that person, either during the moment, during the activity, between activities, between courses, that type of thing. How do we make those adjustments? And this chapter talks about having the feedback loops. So it's not necessarily instructional feedback. It's feedback from monitoring the data to see if this is working. It's basically how software does the engineering or scientific principle about making an observation, forming a hypothesis, designing an experiment based on to validate that hypothesis or pivot, and then proceed and go, do the next. So form a conclusion. So that's how the sensors controllers work. So are we ready for an activity, or do we still have time for that? All right. Michael gave 2 thumbs up, so you guys are ready. So select a job, a task, a system, or you know, an environment, either operational environment or the learning environment. Remember I talked about, you know, classroom could make something complex. Determine what makes it complex. So Michael came up and I came up with a few problem statements. So if you would rather focus on a problem statement, here's a few of them to determine, okay, why was that complex? Either, and what are the dimensions of complexity? And what are the normal accidents? Was this problem a result of the complexity itself? Was it a normal accident? And if so, how can we prevent that normal accident from happening? All right? So we ready? Each table can come up with their own work. You can, if you choose, you can have each assign different roles for each question to each person. And a few of us will be walking around the room. And if you have any other slides that you want me to bring up during the activity, I can. So we'll have several minutes and then we can discuss.
Take 5 more minutes. We'll reconvene at 10 o'clock.
All right, so how was that? Was that, sounds like it was an interesting activity. It stimulated a lot of conversation, or at least me being up here stimulated a lot of conversation. And what I had intended was to have ones that came up with some interesting things, whether or not they're in the bonus round or not, to provide examples, or to get up and talk. We've got a couple microphone runners that are being given the microphones, and it's your chance to either publicly throw darts at me or provide the example that you worked through that you think others might be interested in, as an example of how complexity can help or hinder.
This was really challenging because we chose the teaching diverse student population, and as we were talking, a lot of like conceptual ideas and philosophy and value comes out, but to actually label criteria, like what actual actions, behaviors, indicators, all of that, we found was actually kind of challenging. And then there's like conflicting things too, like we were talking about, we'd like to see that all students are equally engaged in whatever way works for them. But how would we, like we were talking about, could we have like some kind of AI camera that monitored student engagement, like whether they're engaging quietly or, verbally, but then like the invasion of privacy of that. And so like there's all these like conflicting things, and then like the conflicting, like what are the policies in the, in the school that are conflicting with what the teacher is trying to do. So yeah, this is not easy.
No, it's not easy. It's not easy unless, breaking it down into small chunks helps. Learning engineering helps. Collecting the right data and doing the right analysis helps, but there's no magic pill. All right, anyone else? Heard some interesting talks about scenarios, but they didn't want to be called on.
I have to say, I'm sitting at a table of overachievers, and so we jumped right down to the very last question first. Last question in the bonus round. So how can normal accidents be avoided? And one of the things that we talked about from a bunch of different perspectives was how do you involve stakeholders in identifying and visualizing what complexity might happen, and what are the sources of errors prior to starting any sort of engagement. And so we talked about a bunch of different ways to do that, but having that broader visibility to the complexity of the system seemed to be something that resonated.
Yeah, having diverse expectations, different goals by different stakeholders, and having the normal accidents occur in those particular I'll say dimensions again, but for those particular items can cause problems, right? The certain stakeholders have different demands. Yeah, very, very important to understand that. Okay, we've got a table over here.
Hi. Our table focused on the administrator given mixed direction on several projects. So right away, we pretty much landed on a couple of dimensions of complexity that involved a combination of systems complexity, operational systems complexity, and then also people complexity. And so when we unpacked that a little bit, we landed on things around competing decision-making, the process of decision-making, hierarchy, its role, logistical elements around budget, rules and policies that may be in there, and limiting, And then we also just talked about understanding and communications, the people side, and the variety of experiences and understanding that may be contributing to that. And that kind of led us into some different dimensions around number of stakeholders, number of funders, funding sources, teams, number of people and teams contributing, the degree of regulation that may be involved, and the degree of interdependence between some of those. So that's pretty much as far as we got. Normal accidents, we're speaking to a lot of bias and decision making and non-data driven. And also going back to some of your power dynamics and hierarchy around loudest voice and assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah, at the top, you know, is it system complex or is it the task complex? Those could be considered dimensions, and then each of those has dimensions.
So we chose to focus on the mechanic who has to accommodate new technology, which is pretty broad because accommodate new technology goes between, you know, new types of heated seats on a car to a fully electric vehicle, or any other sort of mechanics, whether it's, I think we talked a little bit about drones, airplanes, so on and so on. So one of the issues is we identified geographical complexity, so where resources are available and who is taking care of those things. As well as we did some learning gaps, like who is being trained on these things and where are people being trained on these things and how to take care of this, as well as dispositional gaps. So who feels like learning this is necessary, right? We kind of stuck to the car piece of mechanics, right? So if you have folks who have been working on cars for 30, 40 years, do they feel like they need to know about, you know, computers, LCD screens in cars and other things? And so those were just some of the like smaller, more broad areas of complexity, and dimensions include policy, class area, the way class impacts the area, where do people take their cars to get fixed? Normal accidents can include, I think we even talked about getting locked out of your car on the side of the road because your phone died, or just not having a place to take it, or needing to take your car across state lines to even get it fixed because there's no one in your area who can take care of that. But the way we also talked about how those things can be avoided are largely on a policy level. If you're trying to implement something like, let's say, only electric cars can be manufactured or after a specific date, right? Do you spend some policy time and money, or do you implement some policy to set aside money to close the gaps in your area? How do you identify who in your local community can do that, wants to do that? Where do you provide training for that? So we identified it as like a much broader way to close the gap on a like local policy level, but you also have to be in tune with the folks who put that need out into the community, right? Like who is serving, again, in this case, car mechanics, right? Like who in your community is doing what, and what kind of folks are you serving? And then how can you bridge that gap? And at that point, we kind of decided it becomes a policy thing. So our small little analysis there.
Yeah. It reminds me of the autonomy. And one thing I try to say is that one of my mantras, and Michael will know this one, is on one hand, humans are very predictable. On the other hand, they are so unpredictable. And at least autonomous airplanes, there's fewer idiots up there. Not to insult anybody who's a driver here, but you know, 90% of people other than myself are idiots, right? Yeah. So I've got a closing slide. So model the complexity of the subject matter, the systems, and the content. Think about those different things when you're determining is this complex? How do we break that complexity down? And understand what are the normal accidents? What will occur because of this? Can we put in fail-safe mechanisms, checks and balances to determine when something's not working right? catch those accidents, and then align those tasks that you come up with to the real life tasks, and vary in the dimension that challenges and keeps that person challenged in the right way. Not necessarily to give them an easier problem and insult them, but to give them that aha moment. I thought I discovered a shortcut. I thought I found a way that worked. Now I see why I was being taught to do it such and such a way. And then also competency models, I should call them frameworks, right? It's a framework, it's an ontology of what that expertise is. It provides a mental model of that job or occupation. And then using the open badges or micro certificates and such. All those are mechanisms by how we can break that complexity down and add these fail-safe mechanisms and find the right gaps. So one of the conclusions there is to instrument everything and use evidence to make your decisions. And then for further reading, if you'd like to pick up Andrew Milton's book, I did promise to put a plug in here since he couldn't make it to the conference, although he was excited. So maybe next time the conference chairs, conference committee can try to sell a table to him. And then of course bringing it back to the learning engineering book. So I am a human engineer type of thing. And so I do find what makes this difficult and what assumptions do people have and what assumptions are we mistakenly making. So thank you for your participation. Very interesting.
Thanks, Brant. I think his voice got better as the session went on. He just thrived off of that energy. I will say, it just reminds me how proud I am to be an iciclist, because you all just jumped into that task, and I just couldn't believe the diversity of conversations that took place, and all the good leaders and listeners here. So really, really impressive. We're now moving to concurrent sessions. I was thinking, while I was thinking about complexity, the thing I would have chosen to do would be, what if you're putting on a conference with 200 people with very diverse backgrounds? So we have 5 concurrent sessions. You'll see those in your book. Those actually start at the half hour at 10:30. The rooms are numbered kind of weird, so everything numbers from the back forward. So 1, 2, 3. 6 we're not using right now. That's going to be used for other sessions, but then 7 and 8. So you can find your way over to those rooms, and we're going to reconvene. Starting here at 11:40. So I think we'll be done in those rooms at 11:30. Go for it.